Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we will discuss 9 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From your analysis section, we'll be taking up 2 important editorials. In the first of which, we'll be discussing the various political, environmental as well as security challenges which are being faced in the Himalayan regions, thus directing the government to take some immediate action. Then in the second topic, we'll try to understand who is a gig worker, what are the challenges being faced by these gig workers, and what are the recent remedial measures which the government is actually taking to adopt. Then from your simplified section, we'll be taking up 7 news where we'll try to simplify the news for you as well as provide you important value additions keeping in mind the approaching prelims 2025. So stay tuned. The editorial today highlights the need of a coherent Himalayan policy which shall be adopted by the central government amidst the demand of the 6th schedule being raised by the Union Territory of Ladakh, the impact of climate change visible in the region as well as the various border issues that prevails. And this policy to be adopted by the government forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the theme of government policies and intervention. The editorial today basically highlights the need of a coherent Himalayan policy which was being advocated by the socialist leader Ram Manohar Lohia back in the days. And why there has actually arisen such a need? The first is obviously the demand of 6th schedule being raised by the Union Territory of Ladakh. The second is the very visible impact of climate change in the region, such as for example, you guys can recall the massive landslides which took place in Uttarakhand, or for example, you guys can recall about the Chamoli disaster of 2021, which specifically took place in the Garhwal region or very specifically Nanda Devi National Park, which is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Also, the kind of changes in the politics which is taking place in our neighborhood, such as for example the regime change in Nepal, right, with the coming of the government of KP Sharma Oli, who actually comes from the Communist Party. So obviously they have more inclination towards China, or the kind of the prevailing border issues which we share with China in the line of actual control region, or the kind of communal and ethnic tension which prevails in the northeastern region, the example of which can be seen from the National Population Register trouble in the region of Assam. So let's try to address each of these issues one by one and try to understand the crux of them. The first issue is obviously the demand of the 6th schedule being raised by the Union Territory of Ladakh, which actually come into fruition with the Kashmir Reorganization Act of 2019, which basically bifurcated the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir. For this demand of 6th schedule, very recently, the innovator, the activist, Sonam Wangchuk was actually arrested. Sonam Wangchuk, on whom the character of Funsuk Wangdu of 3 Idiots is actually loosely based upon. Right? So he was basically detained under the section 163 of Bharati Nagrik Suraksha Sanhita, which is nothing but the updated version of section 144 of IPC, right? So let's first try to understand that what is this 6th schedule which has been in the news so often, right? The idea is that in our constitution, there exist 12 schedules, right, in total. Such as for example the first schedule, which actually provides for the names and the extent of states and union territories, or for example the 4th schedule, which basically deals with the allocation of seats in the Rajya Sabha. Similarly, there is a 6th schedule which basically deals with special provisions provided for the administration of tribal areas, specifically under the Article 244 Clause 2 and Article 275 Clause 1. Currently, 4 Himalayan states are being administered under the provisions of 6th schedule. These 4 Himalayan states being Assam, Tripura, Mizoram and Meghalaya. Now the question arises that why the Union Territory of Ladakh is actually demanding for such 6th schedule status. The reason is because they want their democracy to be decentralized with the creation of autonomous district councils and autonomous regional councils. What is the difference between these two? Let's first try to understand that. So let's say there is a particular district in which only one tribe inhabits the district. So obviously the autonomous district council will be created. However, let's imagine a district where there are various tribes. So in this case, autonomous regional councils will be created. Both these ADCs and ARCs basically consist of 30 members, out of which 26 of them are elected and 4 of them are nominated by the governor. So basically these councils consist of elected as well as nominated members. Now keep this in mind, few important things, just note them down. First is that these members, they actually hold the office at the pleasure of the governor, which basically implies that the governor can actually dissolve this council at any given point of time. Second is that these councils, when they are being created in the particular region, governor has the power to actually increase or decrease the area of these council. So what we can interpret from these provisions? We can basically interpret that these councils has been provided partial autonomy and not complete autonomy, because the laws which are made by the central and the state government is still applicable in the region. So the question arises, then what is the actual need of these ADCs and ARCs? Let's try to understand that from the context of the article. The article basically highlights that the population of Ladakh is just around 3 lakh and it is not more than small towns like Ayodhya or Hisar. But if you look at the area of Ladakh, which is actually more than 59,000 kilometers square, it is actually much bigger than Jammu and Kashmir or the combined area of Manipur, Mizoram and Nagaland. Thus, the article basically highlights that just like other northeastern states like Arunachal Pradesh, it should also have 2 members of parliaments or a representative in the Rajya Sabha, right? That is why the Union Territory of Ladakh is actually demanding for the creation of such ADCs, which will allow each of the 8 districts, not just Leh and Kargil, which is inhabited by the different tribal communities, to have their own autonomous district councils, which will be responsible for their internal governance, as well as it will also empower each of the smaller communities to preserve their culture as well as identity. At the same time, such decentralized governance also provides various powers to these ADCs and ARCs. First is that they have the power to make laws on various subjects, such as for example the subject of forest or agriculture, or for example the administration of villages as well as towns, for which purpose they can actually appoint various officers to make laws and enact these laws. Then these councils can also establish village councils or courts, which will be responsible for handling out any disputes which will arise between these scheduled tribes. Here keep this in mind that let's say that there is a case which gone to these councils and these councils actually pronounced a judgment. If that judgment consists of capital punishment or punishment of more than 5 years, then the case will actually be conferred to the governor. And only governor can confer these councils the power to deal with such cases under the various criminal as well as civil laws which are also applicable across the country. Then there are certain various important financial powers which this council has, such as for example licensing for the extraction of minerals, establishing of the public facilities like let's say for example hospital, colleges, schools, roads, etc. And at the same time they can also impose as well as collect taxes. But then what is the reason because of which the central government has actually rejected these demands repeatedly? Out of the various reasons, one of the most important reason is that such creation can actually lead to policy paralysis because of the creation of multiple power centers, such as for example these councils itself, the governor, the local bureaucracy of the region. And because of the tussle which can prevail in this region, that can actually lead to underdevelopment in the region. And do not forget that these are the border states, thus they are very strategic for our country's security interests as well. At the same time, these regions are also facing the impact of climate change. Because if we look at, let's say for example, the Down to Earth report, it states that the Hindu Kush Himalayan region is actually warming faster than the global average. So for example, if we refer to the state of global climate report 2024, which has been released by the World Meteorological Organization. It actually states that the world average temperature has actually risen by 1.4 degrees Celsius from the pre-industrial levels. However, the down-to-earth report actually states that this temperature increase in the region of Himalaya is actually around 1.6 degrees Celsius, that it is warming faster than the global average, which can impact what? The 10 river basins, including the major rivers, as for example Ganga, Brahmaputra, as well as Mekong, which originates in this region. There is 1.5 billion people who depend on these river basins for their sustenance, as well as 240 million people who are living in the mountains and hills whose livelihood completely depends on these, such as for example the ecotourism of Uttarakhand or Himachal Pradesh. Also, the glaciers which prevails in this region, which actually act as the source for all the major rivers which we have, right? So, for example, the idea of Sapta Sindhu of even the Rig Veda, all of that actually comes from these glaciers, the glaciers which are actually going to vanish in the long run. Just look at, out of the total 34,919 Himalayan glaciers, almost 90% of them are actually retreating. The area which these glaciers cover is around, let's say, Himachal and Haryana put together, but specifically the glaciers in the lower altitude, they are losing water at a much faster rate. For example, 67% loss of volume has already been occurred in the low altitude glaciers in the Chandra basin. The Chandrabhaga river, which actually leads to the origin of Satluj river, the Satluj river which is a major source of irrigation and water in the region of Punjab. So let's say if there will be water scarcity in the region, what that will ultimately transpire to? That will ultimately transpire to less water for irrigation. It will actually create the issue of water scarcity. So less water for drinking as well, less water for irrigation, low crop productivity. Low crop productivity, that will ultimately lead to inflation in the region. The livelihood will become unsustainable. So people will start actually migrating from these areas. At the same time, there also exists a major security concern in the region because of the consistent border posturing by China. So obviously, we do not share very cordial relations with our dear neighbor China at this stage. There are various challenges which are being posed by the China. Some of you who will be hardliners, they will say, sir, what is China? We can defeat them any day. But remember that with China, it is never going to be a zero-sum game. The reason being that China actually adopts the wolf warrior diplomacy, where they are solely focused upon their interests at the cost of other countries. And that actually stands in direct contradiction with the idea of Vasudev Kutumbakam, which actually forms the basis of our international relations, that is, the earth is one family. Because of this wolf warrior diplomacy, what it has actually led to? It has led to the stalemate which has occurred in the region of Galwan here, or there is no breakthrough in negotiations with various commander level talks in the region of Depsang and Demchok plains. Also, China is actually heavily deploying military in the central, eastern and western sector, such as for example the deployment of various long-range firearms or howitzers, or for example various missiles. At the same time, they are also creating model villages across the border in this region. What is the cause for that? So let's say for example in the future, the India conducts a military operation and try to rightfully claim back the acquired region by China. Then China will approach United Nations and it will cite that, see, human rights violations is taking place here. That is also the very same reason why China is hugely investing in this China-Pakistan economic corridor under the larger initiative of Belt and Road Initiative. The reason being that this China-Pakistan economic corridor actually transverses through this illegally occupied Kashmir region of Pakistan, thus making China also a party in this dispute. Now, with these various challenges which are actually being imposed upon us, let's first try to see what the government of India has done to tackle with these issues in the region of Himalayas. First and foremost, to tackle with the issue of climate change, the government of India has taken various steps. All of them has been listed here. You guys can just note them down and use them in your answer. We will specifically focus upon the steps which we have taken in the region of Himalayas, such as for example, under the National Action Plan for Climate Change, the government has launched National Mission for Sustaining Himalayan Ecosystem. At the same time, we have also launched National Innovation in Climate Resilience Agriculture in this region. We have launched Mid-Himalayan Watershed Development Project as well as Aquifer Mapping and Management Program. There are various dam agriculture as well as kind of initiatives which we are taking to, just not go overboard with creating various kind of hydel projects in this region, which can actually significantly harm the area, such as, for example, Chamoli disaster. Then we have also taken, let's say, for example, the National Plan for Conservation of Aquatic Ecosystem. We have taken securing livelihood in Himalayas, as well as such as, for example, Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure or CDRI. So all these initiatives has been taken by the government to tackle the impact of climate change in this particular region. Then on the issue of Ladakh, even though government is reluctant to include Ladakh in 6th schedule, the government has offered the inclusion of Ladakh in Article 371, which also deals with the protection of cultural and the economic interest of tribal people. However, it will actually provide less autonomy than being provided under the 6th schedule. Specifically on the issue of China, we are providing impetus on border agreement 1993 and 2013. We are also cutting the import dependency from China, such as, for example, under Make in India initiative or production linked design incentive scheme, or under the national semiconductor mission. So we will not be dependent on the import of diodes from the China. Also, we have adopted the neighborhood first policy. So we have rejected our earlier big brother approach which we used to have for the smaller states like Nepal and Bhutan. Now we are actually providing them a equal place for discussions, right? So that has come under the neighborhood first policy. Then the government has also launched a centrally sponsored scheme, the Vibrant Village program, in your budget 2023, where we are trying to develop infrastructure in this border region in more than 2,900 villages. So that will provide a huge respite to the security forces like ITBP in the region and provide cordial relations in them, countering the model village policy of China, right? China is obviously another big player, so now they are just trying to divert or trying to compromise our water security as well by creating large dams on the river of Brahmaputra. For example, it is creating one of the world's largest hydel power capacity dam on Brahmaputra. So that can compromise our water security in the future as well. So we have to be very safe or very cautious about it. Can any one of you name the current biggest hydel power capacity dam which also exists in China? Just comment that down. Also, there are certain steps which the article suggests which shall be adopted following the Ram Manohar Lohiya's policy. First is to address the democratic rights of the people in the region, right? For example, to advocate India's support to the people's struggle against the rulers in Tibet and Nepal, or to create democratic dialogues with the rebels in the region of Kashmir and Nagaland, to curb down the insurgency which prevails in the region. Then it actually adopts for the rejection of the Warrior Elvin's tribal policy of social and physical segregation of the Adivasis from the non-Adivasis in the northeast. Rather, we should focus upon their more inclusion towards the larger objective of our country's development under the ideology of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. As well as we should try to check the Chinese expansionism, a kind of a failure of the Nehru's policy in 1960. So that we shall be very cautious of it, because in the words of Mark Twain, history does not repeat itself maybe, but it often rhymes. So be very attentive about these kind of developments which are taking place, especially in the newspaper. Try to attempt this question, write your answers. We move forward to the next news, where the editorial actually highlights the issues which are being faced by the gig workers and the recent remedial measures which are being envisaged by the government of India. These issues being faced by the gig workers forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the theme of issues related to the development. So we will start our discussion by simply developing an understanding that who are these gig workers. Gig worker is basically a person who is actually employed in a free market ecosystem, and that person is actually holding a temporary position. So let's say this particular person is actually a delivery guy who is actually delivering this parcel to your doorstep, and this delivery guy has actually been hired by an online platform on contractual basis for a short-term engagement. So that person will be considered as a gig worker. What is the definition which is actually provided to us by the Social Security Code of 2020? It basically states that there is a person who is a gig worker. He is basically outside the traditional employer-employee relationship, thus keeping the employment relation ambiguous and categorizing this gig worker as an independent worker or a contractual worker, right? Now, also remember that the code does not decipher the real employment relations in the gig and the employment economy. So, on the basis of kind of the things which we see around, the gig workers which we see around, we broadly classify them into platform as well as non-platform workers. So let's say, for example, there is a person who is working as a delivery guy for Zomato. Zomato is what? An online platform. Or for example, let's say I am working as a cab driver for Ola. Ola is what? An online platform. Then I will be considered as a platform worker. Then there are certain non-platform workers who actually work, let's say, upon the daily wages, right, for traditional industries. So daily wages, let's say, for example, in our language, we call it something like dihadi. You do a work, you get the payment for that, right? Let's say, for example, the e-rickshaw puller. So he works on daily basis. That falls in the category of a non-platform worker because this e-rickshaw worker is not assigned to any platform, is not working on any contract. Now let's try to understand what is the extent of this gig economy or the economy of scale as quoted by Niti Aayog. So as per the Niti Aayog report, back in year 2022, there were around 15 million freelance workers who were working across various sectors. If we break down this India's gig workforce, around 42% of them were working in the high skill freelancing, such as for example, let's say in IT. 17% of them were working in various kind of personal services, such as for example, let's say teaching. Then 19% of them were actually working in the low skill gig work, such as for example, cleaning, deliveries, ride sharing, etc. And if we look at the key players in India's gig economy, such as for example, Uber and Ola in transport, Swiggy and Zomato in delivery section, Urban Company or Housejoy, or for example, Upwork when it comes to high skill and professional task. Also, the Niti Aayog report states that this particular sector is actually going to create 70 million jobs within 8 to 10 years with 23.5 million jobs in next 3 to 4 years or from 2024 to 2027. 7.7 million of them being created into personal services, 4.4 in construction and real estate, 3.4 in transport and 3.1 around in manufacturing. So just look at the large scale of this sector, and as per the Niti Aayog report, that sector is actually going to contribute to around 2% of the GDP of the country by the year of 2030 itself. However, these gig workers, they faces various kind of challenges as also highlighted by the today's editorial, the major one being that they remain out of any social security cover. So yes, they have been covered in the Social Security Code 2020, which we have already seen that how ambiguously it actually defines who is a gig worker. But the gig workers has been completely left out of the ambit of Minimum Wages Act 1948, Industrial Relations Code 2020 or the Occupational Safety Code of 2020. Let's imagine that I am a delivery guy and I am going to deliver your within 30 minutes hot food being served at your doorstep in the scorching heat of May. Can I ask my employer for a minimum wage in this scorching heat of the summer? The answer is no. Second is, let's say when I am delivering this 30-minute food at your doorstep and I meet with some kind of accident. So obviously I have been injured because of the duty which I am provided or the services which I am being provided. Will I be provided any compensation by the company under the Occupational Safety Code? The answer is no. Let's say that after seeing my plight, some of my co-workers, they go and they want to create a larger demand or they want to raise the issue to the management or do a strike or something like that. Is such a dispute covered in Industrial Relations Code 2020? The answer is no. Also, the editorial highlights that there exists a huge difference in the terms of entitlement between the institutional social security as social security schemes as well. So for example, let's say if I am a worker who is actually employed in the formal sector, right? My provident fund is actually being cut from my salary. Then what will happen? Then I will get 26 weeks of paid leave along with the job security for the entire period of maternity under the Maternity Benefit Act of 1961. Now, let's say the government has launched an e-Shram portal. I am an informal sector worker. I am a delivery guy, right? Or a delivery woman. Now, I am going to register myself on e-Shram portal. What the government says that now I will be being provided with a maternity benefit, which is only a cash benefit of 5,000 to 10,000 rupees, and that's all, which is being given to the registered informal workers. So, I will not get this 26 weeks of paid leave as it is being provided to the formal worker. So obviously the Social Security Code 2020, it sets to provide gig workers with only certain social security schemes but not the institutional social security. Then there also exists several other issues, such as, for example, one of them is limitations of the Social Security Code 2020 itself. First of all, keep this in mind that it is only a code, it is not an act, thus it is not a law which can be enforced at the ground level, first of all, right? Second is that this subject of labor, it actually lies in the concurrent list. So if it lies in the concurrent list, what does it imply? That even the state governments can make the law on this labor issue, so they can provide, let's say, some different minimum wage or some different occupational safety. So there is no uniform law which exists at all India level. So obviously that provides the varying degree of social security to these workers. And the result of it is what? It can be seen from the Fair Work Report of 2022, where 33% of these gig workers were found to be working over 14 hours per day, and 34% of these workers were actually earning less than 10,000 rupees a month. Also, 60% of them actually belong to the various vulnerable section of the society, such as, for example, scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. As we have already discussed, do they have any kind of right of collective bargaining? The answer is no, because they are not covered under the Trade Union Act of 1926. So they do not have any right to go on strike or raise their demand, as it can be seen from the recent kind of demonstrations which were taking place by the Blinkit workers. The third is the case of diminishing return. So if a worker is working for such extra hours and is working so hard, and you are not providing them any job security, any insurance cover, any pension, then obviously their potential as the worker is also diminishing, and that is actually hampering what? First of all, it is working or hampering the demographic dividend of the country, and then it is actually impacting the overall growth of the country, or the idea which we want to achieve, and that is Viksit Bharat. So basically Viksit Bharat is on the road delivering food to you in the scorching heat, and they do not have got any kind of social security cover, which is obviously violating what? They are violating their fundamental rights under Article 23, which prohibits the state to actually safeguard any kind of, let's say, forced labor. So obviously when they are working in such extraneous conditions, it is acting as a kind of a forced labor on them. That is why the article suggests that there are certain steps which are being envisaged by the government of India very recently. First of it is that the Union Ministry of Labour and Employment is actually drafting a national law to incorporate these gig workers into the various kind of social security schemes, such as, for example, the Maternity Benefit Act. Then it is trying to make it more inclusive by revising the definition of gig and migrant workers, which obviously shall be done, as we saw with the limitations of Social Security Code of 2020. Then it is actually going to create a welfare board model and also mandate the registration of all the gig workers on the e-Shram portal. And thus they will be eligible for life and accidental insurance along with other benefits as well. Then the act is also going to highlight the role of the platform aggregators. So they will have to now contribute 1 to 2% of their revenue to actually establish social security fund. Now let's say if they want to do any kind of layoffs, first of all they have to give 14-day notice with valid reasons before the termination. And this law is also actually going to introduce a dispute resolution mechanism between these platform aggregators and these gig workers. So these are the kind of innovative steps which are being envisaged by the government of India. On the very same line, there was a kind of a mains question which appeared in the 2024 examination concluded recently, where they asked about the various merits and demerits of the labor codes in the context of market reforms in India. So we have discussed a lot of kind of issues which prevails, and you could have written that in your answer. Also try to attempt this particular question, comment your answers, and we move forward to the next news. where the article actually highlights the various steps which shall be taken to safeguard the children from the various kind of sexual offenses which are taking against them on an online platform. And this issue forms an important component of government policies and interventions. And let's first try to understand the very grave and serious issue of children's sexual abuse, termed as a silent suffering, also which has been covered in very much detail in the Analyst itself. First of all, we will look at certain numbers for our new viewers. We'll try to understand that what is the extent of this issue in our country. So if we look at the National Crime Record Bureau data of 22 to 23, between the 6 years of 2016 to 22, there was surge of 96% in the cases of sexual violence against the innocent children, where, keep this in mind, the reported cases of child rape and penetrative assault, which actually reached to the police station, it was actually filed as a case, that was 38,911 in 2022 itself. If we look at the number of the rape victims, 43% of them were actually below 18 years. 1.3% were them actually below 6 years, 20% were below 16, and 22% from 16 to 18 years. If we look at the data which was published by the UNICEF report, 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 20 boys is actually a victim of a child sexual abuse, where 20% of the adult women and 5 to 10% of the adult men has actually recalled a child sexual assault in their childhood time period, and 3 out of 4 assaults or out of 4 adolescents who have been sexually assaulted were actually victimized by someone they knew. So these numbers actually highlights the kind of serious issues which exist in our country of the child sexual abuse, and taking the cognizance of that, the government actually took an adequate step and enacted the Prevention of Children from the Sexual Offences Act of 2012, which was also the consequence of India signing the UN Declaration of Rights of Child Convention 1991. Now, let's first try to understand a little bit about the provisions of the POCSO Act. So we'll be able to understand the kind of the recent ruling of the Supreme Court which took place, which has been highlighted by the today's editorial. So according to the Act, who is defined as a child? Any person below the 18 years of age, and keep this in mind that the Act actually emphasizes upon the gender neutrality, where it recognizes both girls and boys as the victim. Now, who can report the cases against this particular act? So let's say if I am a victim, I can report. If you are a friend of mine or you are a family member of mine, you can report as well. Or even if you are an organization who are working to protect the rights of the child, you can also report on behalf of me. What is the penalty for such a heinous crime? Obviously, it is a capital punishment for committing any kind of sexual crimes. The Act also lays down the provision for the speedy justice by creation of fast-track special courts. And the amendment which was done in the 2020, it provides interim compensation which can be directed by these fast-track special courts for the victims, let's say to provide them immediate relief, to provide them compensation for their rehabilitation purposes, to enroll them in schools. And such compensation can actually be provided just after filing the first investigation report or FIR itself. Also, the district children protection units under the Juvenile Justice Act 2015, they can also direct for such a compensation. Now, try to understand these 3 important amendments which were actually introduced in the POCSO Act very carefully, where the Acts was amended, specifically the provisions of Section 15, Clause 1, 2 and 3, and increase the grade of punishment. Grade of punishment for what? Let's say if there is any person who is storing or possessing pornographic material in any form involving a child, but he fails to delete or destroy or report the same to the designated authority. In the second case, if a child, let's say if any person who is possessing such a material in any form which actually involves a child transmitting or propagating or displaying such pornographic material. In the third case, a person who actually stores or possesses pornographic material in any form involving a child for a commercial purposes. Now, there was a ruling related to these provisions by the Madras High Court in January 2024, where Madras High Court stated that merely downloading or watching child pornography is not a crime and quashed a case against a 28-year-old man. However, as highlighted by the today's editorial, obviously this ruling not only defeated the spirit of the POCSO Act 2012 altogether, but also risked normalizing the exploitation of children in such a manner. The Supreme Court took a cognizance of that and did what? It actually corrected this obscure ruling of Madras High Court when on September 23, Supreme Court said that it actually expanded the understanding and the scope of the crime by making downloading or storage of such material an offense, but also mandated a comprehensive framework to combat child sexual exploitative and abuse material, that is CSEAM, and placed a strict responsibilities on the social media intermediaries to comply with the Indian laws. So for example, if you guys are going across the various kind of social media platforms, as for example, let's say Twitter, many of the times such very disturbing things can actually come on your feed. So there are certain people who are actually watching these kind of materials, and thus that will ultimately lead to what? Normalizing such exploitation, and that is why the Supreme Court actually ruled against this child sexual exploitative and abuse material. Also, it stated that individuals who search for or download such material, creating a demand supply, they actually fuel the rape and exploitation of children, and they will also be held accountable. The editorial today highlights for several steps which shall be taken to prevent these children from such sexual abuse, kind of a way forward for your mains answer. Let's first try to see what does the article suggest. The article suggests that we should explicitly define cybercrime in Indian laws and then actually bring this CSEM within the ambit of such cyber crimes. Then we can actually create like let's say when you are saying that this CSEM is actually being driven by on various social media platforms, there are also certain AI generated deepfakes, right? So that can actually lead to kind of a confusion where it will fall in the real category or kind of an artificial category. So the article suggests that we should include that as a real child abuse as well. And then there shall be a strict responsibility which shall be put upon the social media platform for the real-time reporting to the various enforcement agencies. Also, it suggests that there shall be a forensic lab which shall be equipped with cutting-edge technology to respond to the increase in the reporting of such CSEM. Also, such offender details shall be included in the national database on the sexual offenders. Then the article actually suggests that there took place a United Nations Summit for Future 2024. However, it actually missed the crucial opportunity to address these emerging crime against children. Thus, there is a need of a legally binding international convention to actually prevent children from such sexual offences, also which are taking place on the online platforms. So keep these suggestions in your mind and we move forward to the next news, where we are actually going to discuss the Nobel Prize for Economics which has been given for the year of 2024, forming an important component of your GS3 paper under the theme of inclusive growth. So this year's Nobel Prize in Economics 2024 has actually been given to Darren Acemoglu, Simon Johnson and James Robinson. For what? For studies of how institutions are formed and how they affect the prosperity across the nation. Well, there is a very important questions which actually kind of being pondered upon by various economists across the world, including the Indian economist Abhijit Banerjee, who won the Nobel Prize for Economics in the year of 2019. The question being that how the richest 20% of the world countries are now around 30 times richer than the poorest 20%. Moreover, the income gap between these richest and the poorest countries is actually persistent, although the poorest countries have become richer. So the idea is basically that even though these poorer countries are increasing in their economy, the richer countries are getting richer at the very same or much faster rate. So there are key findings of the report. First is obviously the differences which exist in the prosperity between the nation. Let's first have a look between that. So if we look at the World Inequality Lab report of 2024, it basically states that if we look at the economy of the North America, which basically comprises of USA and Canada, that has 390% of the world's average wealth. Europe has 230%. East Asia has 142%, Russia and Central Asia has 54%, MENA countries has 54%, Latin America has 51%, and South and Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa has 40 and 17% respectively. At the same time, if we look at the kind of the income inequality which exists among these regions, let's first have a look at the Europe. So in Europe, the top 10% has around share of 60% of the wealth, and the bottom 50% of the population has close to, let's say, 10%. If we compare the region of Latin America with the region of Europe, the top 10% in the Latin America actually conquers 70% of the total household wealth, while the 1% of wealth is actually captured by the bottom 50%. If you look at our country, the data actually exists the same. 1% of our country actually holds the 22% of our assets. 10% of our country's population, the top 10 richest people, they actually hold more than 50 or around 56% of our total wealth. So this is the kind of a persisting income inequality which exists in the countries, across the countries as well, and within the countries as well. Thus, the research by these Nobel laureates actually highlight the importance of various social institutions for the country's prosperity. Social institutions such as, for example, Reserve Bank of India, which actually controls the inflation. So it makes sure that inflation does not act as a tax or additional tax on the poor people. Then let's say, for example, there is Supreme Court, who actually ensures the protect the rights of the people. Or for example, let's say there is Comptroller and Auditor General, who actually checks on the kind of spending by the government, so keep the government in the checks. So these are the kind of the social institutions. The report or the research by these Nobel laureates highlight that the societies which has poor rule of law and lead to the exploitation of people, they do not generate any kind of growth for the future. So with this section, we will also try to put impetus upon the prelims 2025 which is approaching. So we'll try to have a prelims corner now, and we'll try to learn important facts related to Nobel Prize. First of all, the Nobel Prize was set up in the year of 1895 by the last will of whom? By the Alfred Nobel, the same Alfred Nobel who actually invented what? Dynamite, and had a lot of patent, more than 300 on it. So obviously he became quite rich, and thus he set up these kind of Nobel Prizes to be given to whom? Who have conferred the greatest benefit to the humankind. Remember that these Nobel Prize can be shared up to 3 individuals, right? So let's say, for example, if there is an institution, so in that case, let's say if it is a peace prize, then it can also be given to an institution, not in other Nobel Prizes, right? Can Nobel be awarded posthumously? The answer is no. But what if, let's say, that you were already nominated for the Nobel Prize and then your unfortunate death occurred, then you will get the Nobel Prize. Can you self-nominate yourself for the prize? The answer is no. So there are specific Swedish institutions which actually decides the people who are going to be awarded the Nobel Prize, except the Peace Prize. So for the Peace Prize, there is a 5-member committee, and this 5-member committee is actually selected by the Norwegian Parliament, right? Remember that originally when the Nobel Prize was being given or decided, it was given for these 5 fields only. The first is peace. Who has won for this year's Peace Prize? That is Nihon Hidankyo, a Japanese group which is basically fighting against the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Physics, who has won this year's Physics Prize? John Hopfield and Geoffrey Hinton. For what? For enabling machine learning with artificial neural networks. There is a very interesting concept of Hebbian learning. Can anyone comment what is Hebbian learning? Then it has been given for chemistry to David Baker and Demis Hassibis. For what? For the prediction of protein structure. Then in physiology, it has been given to Victor Ambrose and Gary Ruvkun. For what? For the discovery of microRNA, which was covered very detailed by Analyst itself. And for literature, it has been given to Han Kang, who has become the first Korean writer to actually win the prize for her novel The Vegetarian. Also, when it comes to economics, remember that the prize for economics was actually started from the year of 1968, and that is actually being given by the Swedish Bank, right? So who won the first Nobel Prize, which was given in the year of 1901? That was shared by Frederick Passy and J.H. Durant, who won it for the purpose of peace. Only woman till date who has been awarded twice, that is Marie Curie, for physics as well as for chemistry. The youngest Nobel laureate at the age of 17 years is actually Malala Yousafzai, and the oldest Nobel laureate awarded in the year of 2019 in the field of chemistry is John B. Goodenough. Obviously, he was good enough to win the Nobel at the age of 97. If you look specifically at some of the prominent winners from the India, the first was Rabindranath Tagore, who won the Nobel Prize in Literature in the year of 1930. Then C.V. Raman, who won for the Raman effect in 1930. Then Har Gobind Khurana, who won in the field of medicine. Only woman from India, that is Mother Teresa, who won in the year of 1979 a Peace Prize. Then your S. Chandrasekhar, who won in physics. Amartya Sen, who won in economics. Your Ram Krishnan, who won in chemistry, and Kailash Satyarthi, another Peace Prize in the year of 2014, followed by the 2019 winner Abhijit Banerjee for the field of economics. So keep these important facts in your mind, and we move forward to the next news, where we are going to cover a very interesting article on the right to collective bargaining and right to strike, which forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the theme of various welfare schemes. First of all, the article basically highlights that how the realization of fundamental rights to form a registered trade union to collective bargaining for better terms of employment is actually the heart of the protest by the recent protest which is being done by the Samsung India workers in the state of Tamil Nadu. How the government of Tamil Nadu has responded? It has responded by creating a workmen committee to actually resolve the problem and resort to the police violence actually to quell the workers' strike. So first of all, we'll try to have a little bit of go into the historical backdrop and try to understand the formation of various trade unions in our country under the theme of a prelims pointer. So many of the people actually has this kind of misconception that the trade union movement actually started in our country after the Russian Revolution of 1917. However, that is not true. By the year of 1870 itself, India had the first journal which actually highlighted the plight of the workers working in various industries, and that was Bharat Shramjeevi by Sasipada Banerjee. Then came your N.M. Lokhande, who started Deen Bandhu, a kind of a newspaper highlighting the issues of workers in 1880, created a labor convention in 1884 and established one of the first associations for workers, and that was Bombay Mill Hand Association in 1890. Then obviously Russian Revolution took place in 1917, thus further giving the impetus upon the socialist ideas or on the ideas of the right to the workers. So the first All India Trade Union Congress was created in the year of 1920 with Lala Lajpat Rai as its president. Then it was also supported by the government under the Trade Union Act of 1926, which actually recognized some of the right of the worker, as we were discussing in the case of gig workers as well. In post-independence, there were several important organizations which came up, such as, for example, INTUC, which was actually formed under the aegis of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel in the year of 1947, Hind Majdoor Sabha in 1948, and Bharatiya Majdoor Sangh in the year of 1955. Now, when it comes to the right to form these associations or trade unions, the kind of these movements which were taking place in the pre-independent India, that actually reflected in the constitution as well under the Article 19(1) Clause C, where it actually provided for the freedom of association to form unions or cooperative societies. As well as a member or as a person, you also have a negative right that no one can actually force you to join any kind of association. The question arises here that is right to obtain recognition for such association is a fundamental right? The answer is absolutely no, right? So what does the Supreme Court has held about this right to form association? So in Supreme Court in B.R. Singh versus Union of India 1989 actually upheld the right to form association or union under the Article 19 Clause 1. But it also stated that the state or the courts can reasonably restrict the formation of such union on following provision. First is if there is a danger to public order, morality or the sovereignty of the country. Also highlighting that this trade union actually act as the mouthpiece of the labor. Thus, as per the Act, it is the obligation of the state acting through the registrar of the trade union as the regulatory authority under the Trade Union Act of 1926 to register these trade unions and give individual workers their voice. The benefit of registration under this Trade Union Act 1926 also include, note this down, immunity from both civil as well as criminal action. And the section 4 of this very same act also notes down that even 7 members can apply for registration of their union. So if you are 7 people working in a particular industry, you guys can go and form a union. Coming to on the idea of collective bargaining, right? So first of all, Madras High Court in Rangaswamy versus Registrar of Trade Unions, it actually held that trade union as an organization of labor to enable the idea of collective bargaining. The idea of this collective bargaining has actually been defined in the Article 2 of the International Labour Organization Collective Bargaining Convention of 1981, right, where it basically describe it as a negotiation between the employees and the employer of their organization to actually determine the working conditions and the terms of employment, right. Remember that the collective bargaining is statutorily recognized in the Industrial Disputes Act, right. Supreme Court has held that trade unions have, however, no guaranteed right to effective bargaining or right to strike, right? See, obviously that has to be provided, because as the government, if I am including, let's say, right to collective bargaining, then all of you will just, let's say, come in the month of January and collective bargain for, let's say, increase your salary by 10%. I will have to give up to that if that is included in the act or in the fundamental right under Article 19. Then you guys will come in the month of September, you will say that again collective bargaining increase further by 10%. Obviously, I cannot do that, right? So it is not recognized as a fundamental right. Keep this in mind. In our country, the traces of collective bargainings can be found again from the historical backdrop of the 1918 Ahmedabad meal strike led by Mahatma Gandhi, right? Where he actually initiated the formation of a committee of arbitrators drawn from both the workers. Coming to the idea of right to strike. So do these workers have right to strike? Let's try to examine that. Remember that the right to strike is not a fundamental right under Article 19 of the Constitution. Rather, it is a legal right which has been recognized under the Industrial Disputes Act. And it is considered as a form of demonstration by the worker for their rights, obviously in a peaceful manner, right? Remember that under the 1947 Act, it does not recognize any right to strike as absolute, as the section 22 of the very same Act prohibits the strike in the breach of contract, or if you have not given the employer notice within the 6 weeks before striking, or within 14 days of giving such notice, right? Then in the All India Bank employee case, the Supreme Court held that the right to form an association was a guaranteed one, but the method used by unions to achieve their purposes must adhere to the existing industrial laws and the provisions of the Trade Union Act. The section 6 of the very same act says that there shall be inclusion of honorary or temporary members as office bearers to form the executive of the union. Section 16 says that the same act permits the constitution of a separate fund for political purposes. However, in the case of the strikes by the Samsung workers in Tamil Nadu, such politicization actually led to the kind of harsh reaction by the government. So the article is actually defending the workers that whatever they did, it was within the provision of the law, and that shall be kept in the mind. So remember the right to collective bargaining, remember the right to strike, remember the differences between them. A very probable question can come on this, and we move forward to the next news, where we are going to discuss about a very interesting scientific process called as Haber-Bosch process, which actually played a very important role in India's green revolution and our journey to reaching food security, which forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the theme of science and technology. First of all, we'll try to understand that what are these nitrogen molecules. Remember that nearly 8 metric tons of nitrogen, it actually lies on every square meter of the Earth's surface. However, it cannot feed a single blade of grass, because the plants, they are incapable of taking this N2 or nitrogen present directly, right? So nitrogen in the air is mostly in the form of N2, which you guys can see here. So when these two nitrogen atoms, they join together, they share a pair of 3 electrons, thus creating a triple bond. And thus, to break this triple bond, you guys will require a very high amount of energy, which is around 946 kilojoule per mole, right? So obviously making this kind of an inert. But if the bond is broken, this nitrogen N2, it actually forms ionic nitride, such as for example ammonia NH3, ammonium NH4+, or nitrate NO+3, which is basically a reactive nitrogen. the plant can actually not take N2 directly, but it can take this reactive nitrogen to synthesize various kind of enzymes, proteins, amino acids, etc. So you guys can make this diagram as well for your simple understanding. Now we'll try to understand that how the nitrogen is actually availed in the nature. So among the natural things, the natural forces which exist, only lightning has the enough energy, that is 946 kilojoule per mole, to actually destroy the N2 triple bond, right? The triple bond which exists. In a lightning bolt, the nitrogen in the air, it combines with the oxygen and generates what? Nitrogen oxides, just for example NO and N2. This NO and N2 then can combine with the water vapor H2O and they can create what? The nitric and the nitrous acids, such as for example HNO3 and HNO2. This nitrogen reactive rich droplets, it falls on the ground and fertilizes the farmlands, woods, grasslands when it rains, right? Apart from lightning, what happens? A gentle metabolic process also can occur, such as for example Azotobacter bacteria, that can also create this reactive nitrogen, right? So some microorganisms, such as for example rhizobium, have actually developed a kind of a symbiotic relationship with various kind of legume plants or the nitrogen fixing plant, such as for example clover, peas, beans, alfalfa and acacia. To provide what? To provide the reactive nitrogen, right? On the basis of this, just try to solve this very difficult question, right? The students found it very difficult in the year of 2022. Now it might be sounding easy. So just use this information, solve this question, comment your answers. Now try to understand about azolla. So azolla is what? It is basically a species of aquatic fern which has a kind of a symbiotic association with Cyanobacterium azole. This azole can also absorb and convert nitrogen from the air to reactive nitrogen. So if a question appears that which of the following can absorb and convert nitrogen directly from the air to the reactive nitrogen, the answer will be Cyanobacterium azole. Keep this in mind. Now we'll talk a little bit about the nitrogen cycle which exists, right? So what happens that plant usually get their reactive nitrogen from the soil, where they absorb the minerals dissolved in the water, such as for example ammonium and nitrate. Both humans and plants need this kind of 9 pre-made nitrogen rich amino acids from the plant. For example, these nitrogen, they make up approximately 2.6% of our human body. The nitrogen which is ingested by these plants and animals, they return to the soil through excreta and the decomposition of the dead bodies. So there is a kind of a whole nitrogen cycle which exists, right? For example, let's say there is this atmospheric nitrogen. Now the lightning occurred. Because of the lightning, there will take place what? The reactive nitrogens will form, ammonium and ammonia. Or for example, let's say because of the excretion or the decomposition of the dead bodies by bacteria and fungi, a kind of an ammonification take place and then this reactive nitrogen is formed. Or there is a nitrogen fixing bacteria in the root module, such as for example Azotobacter, or nitrogen fixing bacteria in the soil. So all that can lead to the reactive nitrogen. When this reactive nitrogen converts into nitrites, that is called as nitrification. When these nitrites convert into nitrates and then again converts into atmospheric nitrogen, that is called as denitrification. So remember these important terms. First is ammonification, second is nitrification, and third is denitrification. So remember these three important key terms, right? Coming to that how this ammonia is made, we will try to understand that, to understand this Haber-Bosch process. Okay? So ammonia is basically made up of nitrogen and hydrogen, right? Both of which exist naturally as 2-atom molecules. Now if we apply extreme heat to get to that level of energy, the molecule will separate and form a compound, but it is short-lived because of the heat which has been taken, right? So there was basically a German chemist named as Haber. He heated this N2H2 combination to various temperature in a platinum cylinder and then calculated the amount of ammonia which was being created. So at 1000 degrees Celsius, Haber found that this ammonia was made up just 100 or 1% of the mixture, which was actually too little for the chemical production. Obviously the cost will increase, right, if the final product is so less. So he calculated that the hydrogen and nitrogen would only remain united in extreme conditions, such as for example, if the temperature is around 200 degrees Celsius and there is a pressure of 200 atom. Then there came the Bosch, and what Bosch did, he heated this hydrogen, right, and nitrogen combination and circulated it in a steel chamber at a pressure of around, let's say, 200 atom. Then the chamber had a valve, and this valve basically withstood the high pressure, allowing the N2H2 mixture to pass through. With this, Haber was able to build a contraption to ensure the hot gases and also to form the reaction chamber pass their heat to the cooler incoming gas, right? Thus the departing combination would rapidly cool, and thus the kind of the final product remained stable, leading to the creation of various kind of fertilizers which you see today, right? Ultimately leading to the production of large scale of urea created through Haber-Bosch process, leading to the green revolution, right? Remember that however there are certain negative impacts as well of this large scale use of fertilizers, such as for example, an average adult carries 1 to 2 kg of nitrogen in human tissues, but in many countries the yearly fertilizer application currently exceeds 50 kg of nitrogen per capita. The global average is around 13 kg. So what does this extra nitrogen leads to? It leads to release of reactive nitrogen, ultimately leading to the issue of bioaccumulation and biomagnification. It can also cause various kinds of acid rains, corroding and destroying the lands. As well as nitrogen fertilizers are also part of the larger surface runoff into the fresh and coastal water, thus leading to deoxygenation of surface water and the growth of weeds. So you guys can note down these points exactly in this way or write your answer in this way. We move forward to the next news, where we are actually going to read about the BRICS. The reason being that the Sri Lanka has recently applied to become a member of the BRICS. The BRICS, which is basically an important international institution, so very important for your GS2 paper. Let's first try to understand how the BRICS was formed. So BRICS basically is an acronym which stands for Brazil, Russia, India and China, and it was created in the year of 2006. So this acronym was actually coined by Jim O'Neill, who was the chief economist of the Goldman Sachs of that time, highlighting the kind of the growth potential which these countries has. In 2006, the leader of the BRIC, excluding the South Africa, they met for the first time in the St. Petersburg, Russia. Finally, the 2009, the first BRICS summit took place in Russia, and South Africa formally joined in the year of 2011, thus creating the acronym of BRICS. A bloc which was actually established to kind of counterbalance to the prevailing world order, which was dominated by the Bretton Woods institutions, such as for example IMF and World Bank, as well as the unipolar world led by the United States. So it was spearheaded by Russia and India. The BRICS was envisioned as a kind of an informal club rather than a formal multilateral organization, right? Remember that BRICS actually operate by the consensus, and its significance extends beyond the economic cooperation, such as for example all nation members are also the part of G20 countries, right? So these BRICS countries, they meet annually. They do not have any kind of a headquarter because it is a kind of an informal organization, right? Each nation assumes a 1-year rotating chairmanship. So the 15th summit was held under the ambit of South Africa. Can anyone name where the 16th BRICS summit is actually going to held? The central objective of this summit actually revolves around the deliberation concerning the de-dollarization strategy, right? So for example, rupee-ruble trade which India and Russia launched, right? Also the potential formulation of a common currency to be backed by gold. If you look at the significance of BRICS, remember it has a population of more than 3 billion, consisting of around 40% of the world population, more than that. The GDP of $56 trillion, which comprises of 31% of the global GDP and 18% of the global trade. Also recently, the BRICS has actually further expanded by leading to the joining of several new members, such as for example Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. So just note them down. Also remember that there are two important international kind of institutions which are created under the aegis of BRICS, that is Contingent Reserve Arrangement, which has been created to provide mutual support during the currency crisis. That is why maybe Sri Lanka is applying now. At the same time, there is a new development bank which has a corpus of around $100 billion capital to actually meet the kind of a development requirement of these countries. So remember these important facts for BRICS, and we move forward to the next news, where in the light of the ban which has been put on the crackers as the Diwali is approaching by the Delhi government to actually tackle the various kind of issues which prevails related to the air pollution, we will be discussing about certain important steps which has been taken. First is obviously as the air quality index dropped very significantly to around 234 on Monday after the Dashera celebration. The stage 1 of GRAP, what is GRAP? The Graded Response Action Plan that was actually invoked by whom? By the Commission for Air Quality Management. Just a few important facts about this Commission for Air Quality Management. It is basically a statutory body which was created under the Commission for Air Quality Management Act of 2021, and it specifically deals with the prevention of air pollution in the Delhi National Capital Region and adjoining areas only. Remember that first this body was created by the order of the Supreme Court, then it was converted into a statutory body. So it is basically accountable directly to the Parliament, and its chairperson is basically a government officer at the secretary level, maybe you guys in the future, right? So what are the other steps which has been taken? So there is mechanized sweeping, sprinkling water on the roads, intensifying the use of anti-smog guns, strict vigilance and enforcement of PUC norms as well has been done. Right? Remember that when air quality index between 201 to 300, currently it is around 234 in Delhi, that is considered as poor, and it can actually lead to breathing discomfort to the people as per the guidelines by Central Pollution Control Board. What are the other steps which will be implemented? So you guys can quote this when you guys are writing your air pollution or to measures to tackle air pollution. That will be your Suffer portal, Turbo Happy Seeder machine to actually curb the issue of stubble burning, polluter pay principle which will be provided under the Environmental Protection Act of 1986, adoption of BS6 vehicles which actually emit less number of carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide, as well as the odd even vehicle policies which was adopted by the Delhi government. Keep these important things in your mind. We move forward to the next news, where we are going to learn about a very interesting space mission launched very recently by the NASA. The space mission named Europa Clipper 5, which will actually take around 1.5 years to reach Jupiter, where it will actually slip into the orbit around the giant gas planet and sneak close to Europa during the dozens of the radiation-drenched flybys. Keep this in mind that this Europa, which is basically a moon, icy moon of the Jupiter, right? This is when the Europa Clipper is going to reach there. It is not going to look for life, rather, because it has no life detectors, rather it will zero on the ingredients which are necessary to sustain this life, searching for organic compounds and other clues. Keep this in mind that this Europa Clipper is the largest spacecraft which has been launched by the NASA yet to study the icy moon of Jupiter, whose name is Europa. The Jupiter, which is the largest planet in the solar system, where you guys can also see the great red spot. It is not a volcano, it is rather a kind of a dust storm which is prevailing for more than years. Jupiter also has more than 75 moons, and it has a kind of a ring system, a kind of a belt of asteroids which actually just revolves around it, and that was discovered by NASA's Voyager in 1979. A very interesting factual question here from your basic NCERTs. When we talk about our solar system, all the planets rotate around or revolve around the sun in anti-clockwise direction except two planets. Can anyone comment that down, that which are these two planets? With this, we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation, and thank you.